Welcome to Executive Conversations by the Paypers. I'm Dwayne Jeffrey. In this episode, I'm joined by Diarmuid Thoma, Head of Fraud and Data Strategy at AtData. We're exploring how email and data intelligence is used to detect fraud earlier and the role data strategy plays in staying ahead of it. For someone meeting AtData for the first time, what does your company actually do?
We're heavily focused, in fact, almost entirely focused on email, right? So what I primarily look after is the fraud prevention side of it. A lot of people don't even know the brand very well, and but it's actually quite a mature. It's a 26-year-old company. It's the largest email network in the world. So what that kind of translates to is we process just about 2 billion email interactions a month globally in about 190 countries. Um, and that gives us insight into, kind of what the email activity is happening. And that allows us to do things like fraud prevention, say how old the email, how good it is, what it's doing. Um, and allows us to do a lot of stuff in terms of fraud prevention. So that's that's kind of it. We intentionally try and keep it very simple, keep it, easy to use, easy to understand, and easy to deploy, of course.
Absolutely. And then when you're talking about financial companies, fintech companies, payments companies, what are they utilizing AtData for?
Well, it's primarily kind of type KYC type things, right? So, in finance, there's a lot of different checks that have to happen. There's credit checks, KYC checks, AML checks, and so on. Quite a lot of them are quite expensive, right? So we're not. We're quite easy to deploy, quite cost efficient. So a lot of the stuff is used very early in the funnel for fintechs and finance companies. So we're literally on the point of, as soon as they're creating an account with the company, we're able to tell them, yeah, that in the name associated with the email that you got, that's correct. The email is 20 years old and it's quite active. It's operating lots of different locations, and the IP is quite close to the address that you're. So we give a lot of insight very early in the funnel, and that gives them confidence of the customer. So you'd be surprised. I've seen certain 20% of what the fintech could get could be just rubbish, just nuisance, either intentionally fraud or just really it could be bot created accounts and stuff like that. So they're able to get rid of a lot of that very early in the funnel for relatively minimal cost.
Absolutely. So there's of course a lot of different signals out there, but
Hmm.
most of us treat our email address as just something mundane. We even barely even think about it. But your company tends to treat it as it's one of the most revealing signals of somebody who's really online.
Yeah.
So what does an email address actually tell you?
Well, I mean, why that data is important is effectively is because email is so important, right? Because uh, I've had lots of different emails, but my primary email I've had since I was about 16, and I've kept it with me. But I've changed devices, of course, every couple of years, moved addresses. People even change names, but they'll keep their email,
Yeah.
right? So in the digital world, it it really is the crux of your digital identity. In fact, you're surprised, a lot of our clients refer to it as the email ID, not the email address.
Yeah.
And that's a bit telling, I think, because there's it's so important. A lot of the time we'll see on account opening, you'll see email.
Yeah.
Nothing else, not your name, not your else, just enter your email and whatever, other data point they need. But that's it, just to keep it to a minimum, and then they can follow up from there. So it's so important, and it's so, has such a long tenure within that evolution of a profile, and that it makes it valuable from a customer point of view, and well, evaluation standpoint.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's bring that into sort of like the real world, right? I want to imagine that. So imagine I'm an online lender, I'm approving loans, and a real share of that application, of course, comes from real people. But without getting too technical, how do you know something about an email address that helps me tell who real customers are from the rest of it?
So I suppose there's two scenarios, like the good path, right? The happy path, which is we hope most of your client base, 80% hopefully is good and or plus. And what when they come in and we get the email, it's all real time. Like, so our environment, it's almost like the Visa credit card network. It's emails constantly interacting with us. We see billions obviously coming back, but we see all the interactions. So when a client queries us, we're querying it in right that second, right what's happening with that email right now. So we give that context back. So it's all really fresh, really high context data. But what we're going to say in in the good flow is, yeah, Dwayne, we saw him first time for 16 years ago. He's the address, that's the one we normally see. The name, that's the one we normally see with this email. And, IP looks good. He's not on a Tor proxy or anything like that. And the distance between his address that he gave and that IP is 5 miles or whatever. So happy Beth, everything looks good. And then there's probably other checks the bank or finance company is going to do, and they hopefully align with that, right? Now, on the fraud side or malicious side, it's a very different look, right? It's like the email, quite often actually for lending, email was created that day, right? So the email's new. And if you think about it just practically, if you're applying for a loan as a genuine person, you're not going to create a new email and then immediately go apply for a loan. It's a bit of a telling point, right? But it doesn't end there because some of our B2B lenders, for example, we'd see them replicating. We've seen replications of Citibank, McDonald's, all these other companies that they make a domain. They use disposable domains, but they make a new domain to look like the company, and then they apply for commercial loans based and pretending to be that company. And that's just the start of it, and then they try and do. But we can catch it so early, so we look at that, how the domain is constructed, when it was constructed, how active is that domain. We even have the ability, because we have such visibility to all that activity, we start to look at if a domain comes in, because there is new domains. It's not just because it's new doesn't mean it's bad. It might be new business. So we say, all right, what are the usernames that we've seen? Let's say we've 10,000 in the last month. What was construction pattern in that username? So was it Dwayne 101, Dwayne 202? We see that a lot, so the sequential side of it, and we can detect that too. And we start looking back, pattern analysis and stuff like that. So from a very one single point or a couple of single points, we can determine quite a lot about what's happening and what's going to happen with that client.
Absolutely. Well, so when let's just imagine when one of those fraudsters then sets out to pass as a real customer, um, what about that long-standing email address is really genuine and is probably the hardest to fake?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really rare nowadays because you have different solutions. We're not necessarily the only company that offers email data, but we are the only company to do it the way we do it and how we and with the tenure we have. So what from a fraudsters, they've of course they'll try and replicate it. They might maybe create an email 6 months ago and then leave it kind of settle, or even use it a little bit to make it look genuine. But it's very hard. Like we have such high traffic volumes that we have you break the email out from a single data point to a timeline. So because it is, that's what all effectively profiles are, right? They're a big long timeline, and they should evolve gradually. Some changes, maybe an address, maybe a location, an IP, that kind of thing. But they shouldn't change suddenly, and they shouldn't just appear out of nowhere and then start transacting. So there's a few telling points like that, and that's what's so hard to replicate. People look at, like, we get asked frequently, oh, do we use social data? And we don't, because social data, I myself, I used to work in the very early days on Facebook, and I can tell you that there is a lot of fake accounts, right? And it's especially in this world, with AI and script and things like that. It's not that hard to create those social profiles. So just because they have a social profile with an email, it's not always. Now, more and more, maybe it gets a bit better because but we have effectively a walled garden in terms of our environment, in terms of our data, and we're very protective over that to make sure that it keeps that integrity, because it can't be replicated. They can't insert, and that's effectively what you're doing with social. You're inserting a new data point into a database to make it look legit, but they can't insert it into ours like that. So it maintains its integrity, and we have ability to kind of filter out anything else.
Absolutely. So I think especially now, when you hear data points, when you hear email addresses, when you hear social data, um, everybody, of course, thinks of AI and sort of like the impact of what AI will have. We're already seeing AI being able to spin up a convincing fake person, right? From the deep fake documents, fake background stories, and just being able to create that and actually do damage by causing a lot of fraud with that, of course. So, what is the one thing that fraudsters can still not really easily fake?
History is the hardest, right? So you can backdate documents, so you can fake those, right? But then if you exist, it's hard if you're a new company to do that. But if you're a withstanding company, who's been there, we know they weren't around. This particular profile or this particular email, in our case, wasn't there 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever. So even though now, yes, all of this has appeared as a perfect looking profile with all the verifications, it's possible they moved, and they now moved to a country. Like we see that with with immigration, we'll see like a whole new profile coming in. But again, we treat them initially as correctly, in my view, as suspicious initially until they prove tenure. Um, so we're still kind of insulated from that, and in fact maybe even become more important
Mm.
in that, because the verification steps required in that become like the quality, as you say, is amazing,
Yeah.
some of the stuff, but we managed to kind of again keep our integrity, I guess, again.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, history, I see sort of like this two-dimension thing where you have probably static data. You have an email address, you have a name, you have other data points that you're collecting, but then history makes it another dimension, of course.
Correct, yeah.
Do you think that's an advantage that will actually last, or is it just a matter of time before we'll have AI learning about that and creating history for those profiles, or
Like,
fraudsters using AI for those?
it's an interesting one. I mean, it there's a lot. Like, I've described it before as this is the industrial revolution for the internet, right? AI, the agentic side of it, and it's going to fundamentally change quite a lot of things, but not everything, right? There's some fundamentals that just can't be changed, right? Which is one, for example, when you're going on to buy some sneakers. Well, yeah, now you AI agent that's going to do it, but the difference is you're still getting those shipped to your house. Okay, so now your shipping address is still important, and you're probably going to have like uh want to get the receipt for your purchase, even though the agent, and that's probably going to go to your email. And so there's a lot of that. I was just talking Visa earlier, and they and talk about the agentic flow, and then email was there, and all this, and I said, well, does that go back to the merchant? Oh, it does, yeah, of course. So a lot of those core fundamentals will kind of transcend through post AI, and still will be there. So it's changing is, and I've tried to explain to people, is that the difference with agentic commerce is, you are not directly dealing with the merchant anymore. There's a go between, and that wasn't there before. And that's fundamentally, if you try and simplify it, that's the difference.
Yeah.
You have a butler that's doing it for you now, and so, and the likes of what Experian are doing and that is just verifying that connection, and stuff like that. So that's primarily. But I do, to answer your question, I think we're gonna, be as important or even more so going into the future, because we're still expanding. We've more and more customers every year, and we've been going 26 years, and we're processing billions, but it's getting bigger every year.
Yeah.
So at the moment, there's no indication that it's going to change.
Yeah. And of course, you have plenty of companies who are already in that fraud space, like even though you're in the email space, but then applying that to payments companies for fraud prevention, of course, and identity verification. And we see, of course, a lot of acquisitions also in that space. You have
Mhm.
MasterCard and LexisNexis acquiring different companies for that. So to really set you apart, like what does AtData do that others don't or can't?
Well, one of the things in fraud, like, we're not a fraud platform, right? We didn't, we, and I intentionally didn't want to add like device capabilities and all the other, stuff that does work. It's just that I wanted this product. It's very effective, and I actually used to be a customer, because when I was in fraud product for TransUnion, I used to use the data, and I knew how valuable it was. So it was one of the big reasons why I wanted to come here. But uh, it was very easy to use. It was very understandable. It was very easy to deploy. And I was like, that's its strength, one of its strengths. The other thing as well is, when we look at, who do we compete with? Well, not many. I mean, there's others that have the data, but there's nobody that has our tenure, that has our, our quality, and again, just the ease of deployment.
Mm.
So it's again, it's changing so much right now, and there's a lot of companies out there. But we don't, we plan on expanding our reach, in terms of our different countries and the data. We've generally launched about 2 new features to the product every year since we've developed it. So we just plan on kind of enhancing it, make it more, let's say, AI suitable, and we've already released 3 that have that direct connection. features within the product. So, and that's it really, is just to make it more, more available.
More available to others. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So Experian is a name that most people probably associate with credit scores. Um, but they acquired AtData, a 26-year-old email data company. Um, what do they get out of the deal? Like, how does that expand their reach, or the other way around? How does that work for AtData, and how can you leverage experience
Yeah.
sets in what
I mean,
you provide?
we were quite excited about this deal for multiple reasons, right? Because one, they were actually a customer of ours for 18 years.
Mm.
So we knew them so well already, and they knew the value, and they knew what we had was unique because in the fraud industry, what you'll find when you talk to different companies is most of them are buying from each other.
Yeah.
Right. And what their uniqueness is their combination, whatever combination they end up with. But we were buying from no one. We entirely owned the entire data set. And that was one of the things that made us unique. And of course, from an Experian point of view, because they are effectively one of the largest identity companies in the world. Um, but they didn't have that. Right. So they didn't have the email, they didn't have that history that we have, they didn't have the kind of deployment ability we have. So for them it was a pretty, yeah, pretty obvious fit. For us, what do we get out of it? You know, simply their reach, right? They have, I'm still only kind of getting to grips. It's 4 months in, and now every finance, anything to do with finance, oh yeah, we're an Experian customer. Every single one of them, or without fail. So now we go, well, do you want to use it? And they go, yeah, well, we have a contract already, so it's easy. So the market just opened up to some of the biggest companies in the world, to us. So it is definitely mutually beneficial, and what they like as well is that it's not a regional product. It's not something just for North America. It's not something in Europe. We can deploy anywhere. Like I said, we have 190 countries running now. So that's also a bit unique for them.
Yeah, absolutely. It also looks to me like they have different data sets. Like I think you already mentioned, like because you have that vault data set actually that you've been building with a lot of that historical data, that's unique. That's your moat. And then you have all these other things. You have credit scores. You have insights into businesses information. All of these other things as well. Like what is like a use case that you can share that a company has been benefiting from ad data, but also the experience data sets that actually allows them to do more than just the standalone services.
Well, I suppose one of the examples, what we're going to do is like we're going to be taking some of the Experian, like they're one of the things I love about them is the data quality they have is exceptional, right? Like their procurement of their data, so their identity data. I mean, from my perspective, is what I'm looking at. So we're going to take some of that and enrich the fraud product that we have. Right, some of their global data sets. So from an identity perspective, we're going from good to amazing is the goal, right? So what that means is we'll be able to tie, like with stuff like credit header data, we tie that to the email, tie that to, so it becomes incredibly accurate because all that data is really is high quality, but not only high quality, it's refreshed very regularly, updated, and quite accurate because it's the credit reporting system in the US. It's incredibly important. Most countries it is. So we get the access and benefit of that, and that just makes because our accuracy is generally pretty high, but now we're moving into a different league with different data, data points, and we are now moving into there because you may have seen in the press, Experian are launching a suite of agentic products.
Yeah.
So now the email now will be integrated as part of those agentic products as well. So there's a lot of different things happening right now. I'll come back to you in a year to say, what exactly how it's all worked out. But there's a lot of opportunity in, different regions and different, for different companies.
Mm.
And we have new opportunities like, so, companies like booking.com, which wouldn't traditionally be, an Experian customer.
Yeah.
That's out of sight. So they're excited about that, right? Because we get to go in and have a big impact very fast, and and all that. Like, and we've like great companies like that, like dLocal and a few others that we work with, that would be traditionally outside of their wheelhouse, but we've made a big impact with them, in terms of their KYC and fraud prevention stuff in again, many different markets. So yeah, I think that's it. It very much is mutual. I mean, we we were a company of 55, and they're a company of nearly 22,000 people. So
Yeah.
we're not going to change their world now necessarily, but we'll probably punch above our weight in terms of what we can do for them. All right.
Absolutely. So I think more and more people, of course, are expecting AI assistants to do their shopping or their booking
Mhm.
for them as well. Um, and when it's a bot placing that exact order, how does a business know if that's real or trusted person behind that? Does that link back to the email addresses again, or is there a different way?
Yeah, well, like that. I mean, on the experience side, that's why they've launched the agent trust stuff. Basically, that is, um, it is. I wish I was more part of it. I'm
Mm,
getting into it now, but so that is where they are um bringing in the link between the agent to the basically the person
mhm,
who's ordering, right? And that means that they can assign an ID, and that ID gets passed through as you know when through the flow, and then basically from the on the user customer side, they can see that it has an approved Experian ID, right? So it's a trusted customer. So it's a really cool system, very efficient, very low touch, and but that happens because we were like we were saying earlier, is that there's a go between, that wasn't there before, and how do you link all three? Because there's three parties, right? You link them all. How do you link them all together and trust that? The issue I do see at the moment, there's very little traffic, to be
mm.
honest, because most of the
You mean agentic traffic?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. True agentic traffic, because most of it's being blocked by the website's malware and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like, because traditionally speaking, bots are bad.
Yeah.
Stop, period, nothing. So we didn't want any bot activity, but these are all bot activity. So customers, they have to, or companies will have to change their view of that, because
Mm,
it'll nearly 90% will be good after in a short while. And the challenge will be who's good and who's bad, and that is going to be an issue, with some of the new AI models that are being launched now.
okay. So I think you already touched upon it, but how much of that traffic, right? How much of the transactions is already actively happening? Or are we still looking at very small single digit or a
Yeah.
couple of thousand transactions per day or per month, or
So
is it growing?
it is growing,
Yeah.
but like most of it's still being blocked because of that. But like, so there's a difference between agentic commerce and then AI being used. And so AI being used is very different, right? It's prolific. We see, like I said, we've launched features because of this. So we've launched gibberish detection, sequential email detection, and tumbling. And those three features are basically a direct result of massive script creation of emails, right? So we
Yeah.
see, like I said, domain 101, domain 106, 106, and they goes up like thousands of them gets created,
Yeah.
and then they get spread across different websites. So the AI side of it and the AI malicious use of it is not new.
Yeah.
Now this is commerce, so it's different. There's an agent, and it's designed to do the purchase of it. Yeah, we haven't seen it, but like it, I would say it's months before that's going to massively shift and shift quickly. So most merchants have to create start working now, basically, to be prepared, make sure that they have the right solutions in place, make sure that they have solutions that have the durability to withstand. Because a lot of them, you take, let's say, device ID. Well, it has no relevance in AI, because the device ID wasn't that device. It wasn't your device. It was with the exception of things like the Comet browser. I don't know if you're from Perplexity. That actually uses your computer to do it. So
Mm,
maybe that becomes popular. I'm not sure. We'll have to see how that evolves. But um, so yeah. But I think all of that infrastructure is being created right now,
mhm.
in both from the agenda side and actually the provider side. You're starting to see, like, conferences and stuff. There's all these agentic based kind of solutions are starting to merge. They weren't there last year, so all that's kind of starting to come together. And as soon as they all come together, that's when you'll see an explosion in terms of the traffic, because it is quite ready, I think,
Yeah.
and people are ready for it. So just have to see how it evolves.
See how that evolves. I think another thing that I continue to see, but I think probably a lot of people are also noticing, is that you have some of the bigger tech companies who are providing a lot of email service, like an Apple with their iCloud services, Gmail, of course. More and more are giving people the option to hide their email
Mm-hmm.
addresses, and privacy rules, of course, due to regulations, GDPR, and other things that keep tighten, right? Much more is being done on that way. As more people are trying to mask their email, does that actually hurt your business?
I mean, so there's only one major one really, and it's Apple, who've done it. Gmail allow change, but actually it's quite a cumbersome thing in that they only allow one change a year, and it means you'd have to change all your accounts, right? Your access accounts, and people aren't inclined to do that. But Apple have done it differently, where they have Hide My Email service, right? So predominantly more on apps than it is on the website, but for us, it represents about 2% of our total traffic. So it's still relatively low, and growth rate is limited. Um, so with that one is interesting, because we actually see, because it goes back to a website and it keeps using the same email. So we actually we see returning, even though they've hidden it, we actually see the return rate. So instead of one email, a person has 40, because they're going to 40 different websites. So we see all of those 40 and potentially could merge them back, but so no, for now it hasn't had any impact from a compliance perspective. GDPR, largely from GDPR has provisions for fraud prevention, so it allows a lot more, and rightly so, for companies to have more access to data to perform fraud prevention checks. So we haven't had, like, we do our GDPR compliance and doing one at the moment with Experian as well. So, yeah, it hasn't been a big issue on that front either.
Okay. So as more shopping is being done by those AI agents and more people are hiding those details, does email still stay at the center of proving who somebody is, or does it become just another signals among many? So what do you think?
I suppose it's always a signal among many, I guess. It's a case of, in data science, like we have a ranking, right? So all your signals, how does it rank? And it is top, like it's starting top three, and it very, very rarely deviates from that. So do I see it having that into the future? Almost certainly. There is no, like I said earlier, there's no indication right now that it's going away tomorrow, because there's nothing that replaces it necessarily. The shift with email actually has been that it's not used so much for communication anymore.
Yeah.
That's been the shift. So it's use, but that doesn't necessarily matter to us. But the use of it as a literally a back and forth communication tool, and I mean on private, still used to a certain degree in work. But IMs and WhatsApp and stuff is more predominant now. Where we would have sent an email, now you see, ping someone or something like that. But it's use in terms of checkout, and as the kind of your address, because again, it is an ID/address, because if you're buying digital goods, your physical address doesn't matter anymore. So, but you still need an address, and it's something for those confirmations to go to, and that's email. And I don't see where it would go other than that.
No, absolutely. So I tend to be a very positive, future focused person. But however, sometimes when you're building something, you're building a new company, there's always roadblocks ahead of it. What is something that you believe that needs to drastically change, right? It could be regulations, it could be technology itself, it could be just the way that companies are operating or maybe utilizing emails, that you believe, like, if we can change that, we can actually get a lot more innovation. We can, grow substantially, not just as a company, but overall as businesses.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, like, the rate of progress is phenomenal, and and right now my issue is actually around with AI, is that it's that transparency. There's a lot of fear mongering with it, it's particularly that, and a lot of people, they're afraid of what they don't know. So it's AI, 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 and it's gonna, either, depending on your viewpoint, it's going to destroy everything or create everything. It depends on what you look at. So that transparency and that insight is a big issue right now for consumers, businesses, everything, because they're petrified, most of them, as to what happens. So I don't have an answer for it, unfortunately, but like, the is that transparency into, like, if we were able to do it nicely and have a nice clean, okay, over the next 5 years, this is what's going to happen. Everybody could kind of settle down and work towards that. But the other issue, I think, is the confusion. I'm on okay, I build these products and stuff like that, but I do sympathize with the buyers, the companies out there, because you go to conferences and there's thousands of companies, hundreds and thousands or whatever of companies, and for the most part, they all look the same.
Yeah.
And you're like, how do I pick one of these, and how do I know I got the best one? How do I? It's a massive challenge, for companies to find the correct vendor for them, and a lot of the time, I think there's just sick of people, pounding their door and stuff like that. Um, so I think they're the two for me. If they were those two issues,
Mm.
it would make things life a lot easier. The transparency and I suppose they're both effectively about transparency. Um, so yeah, being able to filter out some of the vendors that are suitable for your industry, and that noise, and then transparency into the AI. Now, hopefully, the transparency into AI is kind of self-fulfilling, right? That over time we'll start to get used to it, like we did with the internet. I mean, you could argue it was the same going back about 30 years now with the internet. We're like, oh my God, what? Nah, all the bricks and mortars, the high street will never change. And yeah, it has. It has changed dramatically. So we're probably seeing it. I just hope that it doesn't happen too fast, that people, catch them unaware, that they have time to prepare and kind of get ready for it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining Executive
Oh, great.
Conversations. It was great having you on as a guest.
Mhm.
And till next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If you like this episode, hit like, follow, and subscribe for more.